right, so it's about 5 past now. I think there's a couple more people signed up, but we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Deborah Corellis, and I am a senior analyst here at Meditech for PCS, BMV, critical care, and long-term care. And with me I have today Concetta Paolini.
Hi everybody, I am also a PCS, BMV, critical care, and long-term care specialist.
And today we're going to be talking about PCS rules. For those of you that have signed up for tomorrow's session, Dave Brody will be with us to talk about OM rules. So if you have any questions about OM rules today, I will make sure to make note of that so Dave can speak to those tomorrow. With Zoom that we're using now, everyone is listed as an attendee. So if you do have a question, please feel free to use the chat feature. While Concetta is presenting, I will be monitoring the chat, and while I am presenting, Concetta will be monitoring the chat, so we can use that if you have any questions while we're presenting and during that process. So I'm going to hand it over to Concetta so we can go ahead and get started.
Hi everybody, so I'm just going to start. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We do have a presentation for you guys today. Okay. So like Deb said, this is our PCS and OM virtual rule seminar. So today we're just going to be talking about our PCS rules. I'm going to be starting off the presentation by going over some rule concepts. We're also going to take a look at the MIS rule dictionary, and then I'm going to hand it off to Deb, and she's going to be going over some rule examples and how to build them and how they're going to turn out to use. But first off, we're going to talk about the definition of a rule. We're going to go over some of the terms that you'll see when you are using rules. We're going to discuss some rule concepts, and we're also going to go over some of the calculation concepts we see as well. So a rule is just one or more lines of code that will be interpreted by a routine. So EDM and PCS use rules on assessments in the documentation section dictionary. We use them to calculate values, to determine query behavior such as skipping, suppressing, or requiring certain queries. We use them to display information, informational or warning messages during documentation. And we also use them to determine query navigation. So for example, our jump rules that we utilize. A couple of the terms that you will see or hear when you're using PCS rules. So one of them is going to be a variable. So these are going to be your pieces that act as the building blocks for your expression. For example, in the expression A plus B, A and B are going to be known as your variables. We also have our operators. So these are going to be the either arithmetic operators, so just your addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, things like that. We also have the Boolean operators. So this is going to be the and or minimum or the maximum. And we're also going to have our relational operators, so your greater than, less than, equal to, so on and so forth. And lastly, we have our expression. So the expression is going to be comprised of the variables and the operators. And the value is going to be determined by evaluating the actions of the operators on the variables on a strict left to right basis. So with rules, everything will have a value. So all values are going to be a string of characters. A string length of nothing will be presented by the term nil. So now moving on to some arithmetic operators. So the symbols will indicate what form of arithmetic is to be performed. So you have your addition, you have your subtraction, multiplication, division, your modulus, which is going to be the remainder on the division, and you have your offsets. Some of our relational operators, so these are used in the condition portion of an if statement before the expression is executed. So we have is equal to one of the following, is within range of, is not equal to any of the following, is not within range of, less than or equal to, less than, greater than or equal to, greater than, exists, does not exist, or exists in list. So our expressions will be evaluated and determined to be either true or false. So depending on what is being evoked with the rule, a true or false value can cause the rule to be executed. When evaluating an expression, a nil value is going to be considered false, whereas a non-nil value will be considered true. Now we're going to talk about some of our if statements. So we do have 3 different if statements that can be written. The value of an if statement will be the value of the last expression evaluated. So the 3 different types of if statements that can be written, the first one is going to be our if-then statement. So if the condition of the rule evaluates to true, then execute the rule. For example, if A exists, then A times 4. Our second if-then statement that can be written is just going to be our if-then-else statement. So if the initial condition of the rule evaluates to true, then execute the rule, else, or just known as otherwise, if the initial condition of the rule evaluates to false, then if the next condition of the rule evaluates to true, then we want to execute the rule. So for example, if A exists, then A times 4. Else B exists, then B times 4. And our final if statement that can be written is going to be if, then, else if statement. So if the initial condition of the rule evaluates to true, then execute the rule. Else, if the initial condition of the rule evaluates to false, then if the second condition of the rule evaluates to true, then execute the rule. Else, if the second condition of the rule evaluates to false, then if the third condition of the rule evaluates to true, then execute the rule. So this type of if statement would be a nested if statement. So it's just going to allow for multiple conditions to be defined. For example, we have if A exists, then A times 4. Else if, otherwise known as just or, B exists, then B times 4. Else if C exists, then C times 4. Else if D exists, then D times 4. So when doing our calculations, the value is going to be determined by evaluating the actions of the operators on the variables in a strict left-to-right basis with no precedence of multiplication or division over addition or subtraction. So for example, normally when we would have an equation such as our examples below, the 1 plus 2 times 2 minus 1, we would take our multiplication and then move on to our addition and subtraction. So normally, if we had this equation, we would take our 2 times 2, which would be 4. We would then do 1 plus 4 equals 5, minus 1, giving us a result of 4. But when it comes to our PCS rules, we're taking no precedence over multiplication or division, over addition and subtraction. We're just doing our calculation from the left to the right. So for our PCS rules, we would take 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 times 2 is 6, 6 times 1 will give us a result of 5. When you come across a calculation that's going to have decimal places in the result or in the equation itself, there's a couple different things to keep in mind when you are using decimal places. So if you have an expression that is using addition and subtraction, the result will contain the maximum number of decimal places from the variables. So for example, in our equation 22.4 plus 13.06, our maximum amount of decimal places in the expression is 2. So in our results, we're going to see the decimal place of 2, so giving us 35.46. When it comes to multiplication, the result will contain the addition of the number of decimal places from each variable. So for example, we have 14.26 times 2.1. So our result is going to be the addition of both of the variables' decimal places. So we have 2 in the first one and 1 in the second. So that's going to give us a result that will contain 3 decimal places. So giving us the result of 29.946. If we are using division, the result will contain the number of decimal places in the numerator. So we have our example of 96.1234 divided by 11.1. So our numerator has 4 decimal places, so that's what we are going to see in our result. So giving us the 8.6597. If we are using an expression using the modulus, so again, that's just the remainder on the division, the result will contain the maximum number of decimal places from the variables. So for example, if we had just the equation 73 divided by 9, that would give us a result of 8.111, so on. So if we just take 73 divided by 9.0, that's going to give us a result of 1.0. So let's take, for example, we have 1 divided by 3, but we know that the result that we need is 0.33. So the number of decimal places displayed in the result is going to be determined of how we set up our expression. So if we have 1 divided by 3, that's going to give us a result of 0. If we add a decimal place on, so if we do 1 divided by 3.0, that's also going to give us a result of 0. If we add a decimal place in our numerator, so if we take 1.0 divided by 3, that's going to give us a result of 0.3. And if we add 2 decimal places in our numerator, so 1.00 divided by 3, that's going to give us the result that we need, so that's 0.33. Deb will actually be going over a rule example where we found a modulus was needed to be used in order to calculate the billable hours. So you will see the modulus used again coming up in our rule examples. Excuse me. So when you are using division in a calculation, you'll first want to determine the number of decimal places that are going to be required in your final result. The number of decimal places on that final result will be the number of decimal places in the numerator of the final expression within the rule. You can use the round to functionality to add decimal places in the numerator as needed. But some suggestions that we have when you are using division for your expressions and used in your calculations, just to keep in mind that the result of the value to one more decimal place than is needed, and then you can go ahead and use the round to functionality to obtain the desired decimal place in the result. This is usually going to result in a more accurate decimal value. And just be aware of the need for decimal precision because some calculations vary. So for some calculations to obtain accurate results, you want to just be aware of the decimal precision when you're creating your expression. Now we are going to go ahead and move on to our second agenda item for today. We're going to take a look at the MIS Rule Dictionary. So I'm going to show the pathway to be able to access this dictionary. We're going to take a look at the numerous tabs within the dictionary. So your main tab, our variables tab, our rules tab, our notes tab. And we're also going to discuss making edits to your rule, saving your rule, how you would go about assigning your rules, and how you would go about testing your rules. So I'm going to close out of the presentation for sharing my screen. I'm going to open up one of our testing rings to show you the different ways that you can access the rule dictionary. So there are two different pathways that you can utilize when accessing the rule dictionary. They're both going to be the same dictionary, it's just a different way of accessing them. So the first way that you can access the rule dictionary is going to be through Info Systems, MIS, Dictionaries, Administrative, and we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom. We're going to find Rule MAT, and then we have our Rule Dictionary. Another way of accessing the Rule Dictionary is going to be through our Clinical menu, so Clinical, Dictionaries, Ordering, and Rule. So users can put the Rule Dictionary any way they want for their menus. These are just going to be our standard way of accessing the Rule Dictionary. So we have on our main tab, this is where you can create the name of your rule, the mnemonic that you want for this rule, if it's active, yes or no. You can choose your category. You have to select your mode, so your options are going to be production or test. And you can also set up disabling the flow sheet rule caching. So this is just a yes or no. Now we're going to go ahead and go over to our variables tab and look at our information displaying here. So the variables and the data fields that are entered here, these are going to be what is used on our rules tab when we go to create our rules. So starting off up at the top, we have our variables section. Excuse me. The first variable that we're seeing is our new query response. So this is always going to appear when you create a new rule. This can't be removed. It can't be set to external. You just want to leave this as it is. You kind of just want to ignore it altogether and pretend it's not there for your PCS rules, because this is going to be specific for OM rules. And Dave Baruti will be going over this tomorrow when he discusses the rules from the OM side. So when you're creating your variables to be used in your rule, variables will have to start with an alphabetical character. So you can't use any spaces or you can't use any symbols when you are creating a variable. So for example, if I was to create a new variable and I wanted it to start off with, let's just say, an exclamation point, and I tried to select enter, it's just going to give me this error message saying that the variable has to start with alphabetical characters. When a value from a query on an assessment is going to be used in the rule, then the variable that represents that query should be set to external yes. The variables will then be mapped to queries that are going to be used in the rule within the documentation section dictionary, which we will be going over. But if no description is entered, then in the mapping process of the rule, what is entered from the value in the variables column will default into the rule variable section. So along with the variables up at the top, we also have this field section of the variables tab. So the lookup here is going to be restricted to those data fields within the data fields category selected on the main tab of the rule dictionary. So if we go back to our main tab, it's just looking to our category that we have chosen. So the category that can be used to access that field, the categories will just be reg or clinical data. In a data field, this is an element that will retrieve an item of data from our Meditech database. So for example, maybe if you wanted to pull in a patient's age or sex, a value that was previously documented, or maybe just the current date and time, things like that, this is where this field could be utilized. Now we're going to go over to our rules tab where you would actually go and use these variables that you have created, and you will go and use them on our rules tab to create your rule. So the system will interpret the line of the rule in the order that you enter them. So your variables will need to be converted to the appropriate format before being able to be used within the rule's expressions, your calculations, or your messages. Variables will need to be converted to the expected display format after an expression has been executed, a calculation done, or a message created. So when you're going and starting a new rule, every new creation of a rule is going to be started just by selecting this Enter Line tab right up at the top. So selection boxes, as we see, will then appear, and that will allow for different selection boxes of the entries to be created. So each of the different selection boxes are followed by additional selection boxes that allow for the information needed in the rule to be entered. So if we select expression, we're going to see that we have different options for our selections, whereas if we wanted to go and select the message and dialog box. And right now I am utilizing the undo tab. I will be going over that. I'm just going to select this right now to get rid of what I have just done. So our current value display field, so just this box right here, this is always going to show in the in process line, and it will always show the components of the rule that have already been entered. So you can see your expression as you are creating it. When you're finished with your line of the rule, you would simply just select our End Line tab to be presented with additional selection boxes. You just need to make sure that the expression is complete before selecting the end line. So for example, right now I've just selected my expression and compute. I haven't really created a line necessarily, so if I was to go and select end line, it's going to give me this error message. It's going to say, compute the expression is missing because I really haven't created a line fully yet. So if you do try to end the line before the expression has fully been entered, you will receive this message. So the first selection box that we're going to focus on is going to be our expression. So when I enter my line, I'm going to get this selection box. I'm just going to go ahead and click expression. And we have a couple different selection boxes just by clicking that one selection. So first is compute. And this is where calculations would actually be created. We have set program results. This is telling the system that this is the end result that needs to be displayed. We have create list. So this is to put variables and or fields into a list that may need to change the values into a different format. This can also be used to default a response on a group response multiple. And lastly, we have our launch web URL. So this is to have the rule launch us to a particular website. Next is we have our message and our dialog box. Our first selection is going to be message. So FYI and critical messages will be created using this option. We have our yes or no questions. So this is going to create a message to be displayed to the user requiring a yes or no response. To have these responses saved, an additional query would need to be created. And lastly, off of this selection box, we have multiple choice. So this is to create a message to be displayed to the user requiring a selection from a predetermined list for responses. So only one response can be selected, and to have that response also saved, you would also need to add an additional query. Next, we have our string manipulation. So our options here are going to be a format. So this is to convert a variable or a field to a different format. We have extract. This is going to pull a specific value from a variable or a field. We have join. This concatenates fields, variables, numbers, or it allows a free text into one expression. Next, we have locate, and this is to find a specific value within a variable or a field. And our last selection box off of our string manipulation is link, and this is to find the number of characters in a value. So we also have this notes tab in our rule dictionary. So I'm going to go ahead and just go in here. And this is a free text editor. So users can free text in whatever information they want displayed. So this could be utilized to record information pertaining to the rule. So users, if they wanted to just add the doc section and the query that this rule is attached to, if you want to add any testing information. If you want to make note of any changes that are made to the rule, this could be put in here as well. The history of the rule dictionary does not record individual changes made to the rule, so that might be a good thing to utilize the Notes tab in the rule dictionary for. But just to go back to any of the tabs within the rule dictionary, we're just going to go to page. Otherwise, you could click cancel, or you could save whatever information you have entered in the Notes tab. But I'm going to select the Go To page, and you're given the option to go to the Main tab, the Variables tab, the Rule, or the Info button. But we're just going to go ahead and go back to our Rules tab. So when you are creating a rule, or if you've already created your rule and you've ended the line, you are able to edit. So we're going to go ahead and edit the rule that we already have built. I'm just going to select one of the lines that have already been created, and I'm going to go and click on our edit footer. And this is going to allow us to edit the value that's in our current value display. So let's just say that we wanted to edit the rule to have it say, if B1 is equal to yes, then set program results to not okay. So we're going to you would go and select the value that needs to be edited. So in this case, we're just going to highlight this okay. And once you select the value that you need to edit, the appropriate selection boxes, so right over here, this is going to appear so that a new value can be chosen. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to select edit. We want to edit this okay value. And then we're going to choose our variable that's given to us once we select our edit. So we're going to change it to not okay. So once you've made your edit, so our current value is now not okay. It hasn't updated our line yet. So to update that line, you're going to just simply select end the line. If you made an edit to it and you realize the rule actually doesn't look how you wanted it to, you could just simply select the undo edit footer. So I'll go ahead and select that, and that's just going to undo any edits that we had been working on. We also have the undo option right up at the top. So this is going to be used to remove the last expression that's been created in the line. We have backspace. So this is going to remove the last element selected in the line. And lastly, we have cancel line. So this is going to actually delete out the entire line from the rule. So you want to just be careful when you are utilizing the cancel line, because it will delete the entire line. So when you are going ahead and you decide that you have your rule created okay and you want to go ahead and save it, the rule can be saved once you enter your information on the main tab or on the variable tab. And a rule can also be saved after you end a line. So I'm going to go ahead and make that edit one more time just to show what happens when we actually go ahead and save the line. So we'll go ahead and we'll change this to set program results to not okay. So again, I'm going to go into edit. I'm going to be highlight on my current value that I want to edit. Out of my selection box, I'm going to say I want to edit this value. And I want to edit it to not okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and click end line. And it's just going to update that line. Now my rule is if B1 is equal to yes, then set program results to not okay. So I've built my rule and I have everything how I want it. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And once we go ahead and save it, we're going to notice a translation box is going to appear. So I'm going to go ahead and save. And we get that quick translation box that's appeared. But this is only affecting saving the code, and it won't be any indication that the rule will work or it won't work. During the rule creation process, any improper syntax will be flagged when attempting to end a line. So once you have your rule built and saved, you want to go ahead and assign it to a doc section. So the rule is going to be assigned on our Rules tab of the doc section. So we're going to go ahead and jump to our Documentation section dictionary, Clinical, Dictionaries, Documents, Documentation section. And you're going to assign your rules just right over here, so on our Rules tab. And you would just want to make sure you're highlight on the correct label and your correct query that you want to attach the rule to. And then you would just select the rule type. So your options for here are going to be suppress, skip rule, calculate rule, require rule, or message rule. Your method is going to be by rule. And then this is where you would pull in that rule that you've just created. It's just going to give you a look up to the rule dictionary. And then you could go ahead and assign any external variables. And then you would just go and save your documentation section and go ahead and start testing your rule. So for testing your rule, you would add the intervention containing the doc section to a patient. You would just test the rule by entering values as needed or to meet the conditions of the rule. If the rule does not work as expected, you'll want to go back and edit the rule as needed, and then go back to your patient and do any redocumentation. For calculation type rules, you will want to test with realistic values to ensure that the correct results will always be displaying. So I am actually going to now hand it off to Deb. She's going to be discussing some of our rule examples, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and assign it over to her.
I don't know if everyone saw the chat, but while Conchetta was presenting, there were a couple questions that came up, and I did address them, but I'll say them out as well. One of the questions was, can you explain the query box on the variables tab? So we don't go over the query section during PCS rules because it's not something that PCS rules can use. So I pretend that it's not there, so I don't get confused for the most part. I know OM can use it, so I believe Dave will be talking about that one tomorrow. Another question was about the disabled flow sheet caching. So that is to prevent any calculation problems that might happen when we're referencing any data fields. For the most part with PCS, you can leave this blank, but we do often see it set to yes for any of our regulatory or MDS rules. There was another question about the presentation and things we've gone over today. There is the PCS product and resource homepage. There's a rule section under there. The presentation that's up there might look a little different, but it's all of the same information, probably just in a slightly different format. And then I also included a knowledge base article, 45846, that includes some additional information about the disabled flow sheet rule caching field within the rule dictionary. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get my screen shared. Please continue to use the chat section as Conchetta will be monitoring the chat while I am presenting, and will either answer the questions or stop me so I can address those. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to go over some more advanced rules than what we usually typically go over during our rule seminars here at Meditech. So we wanted to be able to provide something that's more advanced. So the first thing I'm going to look at is using a group response multiple. So there's two different ways that we can, build a rule to look at a group response multiple. The first one is offsets, which could be a little tedious, and the other option is using the exist in list. Exist in list is a lot easier. I don't know why. I'm more of an offset person, so I tend to always end up using offsets. But offsets can be a little confusing. So I'm going to pull up my first rule. We're going to go over to the rule tab. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my documentation section so you can see what we're working with. So here I have two different queries, my impairment query. And what my query is doing is if I document other, I want my comment to be required. So we go ahead and take a look at my rule. So I am converting the I, which is my only external variable. I'm converting I to group response name. And we convert to group response name because I need to tell the system that this query is a group response type query and that I'm going to be looking to the name of that. We can also use group response value, which we use when we're doing calculations, which I have an example of that we'll look at. We can also use rank. I tend to use rank when I'm converting just because your rank is going to be a number and not that great of a speller most of the time, as you might have been able to see from the chat. So I like to use the rank. If you're using rank with its intended purpose of actually ordering things when you're documenting, rank might not be the best option, but I typically like to use rank. So the first thing I need to do, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all this and then rebuild it so you guys can see what I'm doing. So as I mentioned, the first thing I need to do is tell the system that it's a group response. So I need to do string manipulation, format, and my source. I'm going to do variable, I, and then convert to. And I want to do group response name, so I'm going to do that. Save as, and then I want to save it back to that I. And then end line from there. Now the next 8 lines are my offsets, and offsets can be a little confusing to understand, and they don't mean the responses exactly, but it means and it refers to the possible clicks, because I can select other as my first click, or I can select my second, third, and so forth. So I need to tell the system, no matter when I click other, I want it to be required. So we're going to go ahead, I don't want to close anything, and build out our offsets. So I'm going to do enter line, expressions, compute, expressions, variable, I, because I want it to look to my I, and then operator, offset, number, and I always need to start at 0, variable, and then I'm going to save that to V1. And I'm going to need to do that for each possible click. So I have 8 possible clicks, so I need 8 offsets here. So I'm going to go ahead and build the rest. Compute expressions, variable. So now I'm going to do I, operator, offset, number, 1, and then save as V2. So now number V2, save as, number 2, save as V3. Offsets are a little tedious to build, so I know some people don't necessarily like that. I know I didn't at first, and then obviously we got the exist and list functionality, but now that I understand them, I tend to go to those as a default. And each of the offsets are its own line, so that's why I do need to click end line after each one. Okay, so let's keep going. variable. Sorry, my computer keeps slowing down. And then I just have one more variable, one more offset that I need to build. So now I have defined my offsets. So these are each possible click. It doesn't correspond to a specific response. So then I need to do my final line, which is telling the system when I select other what to do. So I'm going to do enter line, if, then I'm going to do free text, other, operator, I'm going to do is equal to one of the following, and then I'm going to do variable v1, variable v2, variable v3, 4, 5, v6, v7, v8. So if other is clicked the first time, the second time, the third time, fourth time, fifth time, sixth time, seventh time, or eighth time, then I want it to compute expression, set program result to OK. And there's my line. You'll notice I have to then end my if statement. I can't even save at this point. And then end if. And that gives me my rule that I'm building with offsets when I'm using group response multiple.
Okay. We are getting some questions about the terms and the different variables that are in the offset rule, so V1. So those are just the possible clicks that you can use when you're going through and choosing your responses. But we also did get a question about defining the terms used to build the rules. We did, so the terms that we have, so the I is just the only external variable, and then the other variables are not going to be set to external because these are just our clicks, so they aren't mapped anywhere. They're just representing our different, the different clicks you can go through when you're selecting responses for your group response.
They're essentially just a placeholder. Okay. All right, so next I'm going to go into my exist in list. So this is doing the exact same thing that I just did, but a lot quicker. So you'll see I have one variable that's set to external, and that is my V1, and then I have an additional variable, which is list, and that is not external, it's just a placeholder. So when I go over to the rule tab, once again, I do need to convert it to group response name, and I'm converting that also to a different variable here because it's saving the name as a list and it's doing the exist in list. So I'm going to go ahead and build this one out for you so you can see how much easier it is than what I just did. So if I do string manipulation, format, source, variable, v1 because that's my external variable, convert to, once again I'm going to do group response name, save as variable list. The variable of list can be any variable. I just happen to call it list, and line. And then in enter line, I'm going to do if, free text, other, operator, and I'm going to do this in list, which is down here. And then I just need to select variable and list. I'm going to do end line, statement, expressions, set program result to OK, and end my line. So that is exactly, almost, well, the same concept of what I just did with the offset, except it's a little bit shorter. And we have examples of both of those on our PCS project and resource homepage. Like I said, I'm partial to offsets probably because that's the way I learned it and it's familiar to me, but exist and list is obviously a lot easier if I'm dealing with group response multiples. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the documentation section dictionary. So here is my offset one, and I have my comment. So I attached it as a required query by rule, and here's that offset rule. And my variable was the I, and I had to map that to my impairment offset. If I look at my second comment on here, you'll see I mapped that V1 to my second impairment. So I do have a patient that has this on them already. So you can see that it's doing the exact same thing, it's just one way is a little bit easier.
We got a question asking if offset is just another name for the amount of clicks.
That's the best way to think about it. The first time I really learned offsets and worked with offsets, my head got so wrapped up in it because the number of offsets are the same amount as the group responses. So I was always thinking that the group responses match the offsets exactly, and it's really just another name for clicks. So yeah, that's a great analogy. So I have everything on my PCS patient 7. And we will document here. So I'm going to collapse this for now. So here I have my other. If I select other, you'll notice my comment becomes required. I uncheck it, it's no longer required. If I check off a couple different things, then select other, it still goes to required. If I uncheck them all, it goes away. So when I did the enlist, you're going to notice it does the exact same thing. So it's just two different ways of doing the same thing, and you'll see a lot of that in the rule dictionary when you're building those. Some ways you can, there's some rules that can be 20 lines long, but you could maybe, by tweaking some things, do the same thing in a little bit shorter lines. This is an example of that. So it's up to personal preference. I would understand why everyone would probably rather use exist and list. So makes sense. It's a lot simpler, a lot quicker. Okay. So next I'm going to look at a calculate rule. So we're going to jump into the rule dictionary. We're going to start on the variables tab. So you'll notice I have new query responses there, but that one, like the query section, is a figment of my imagination because PCS can't use it, so I just ignore it. I have my V1 here, which I'm using for my total score. I didn't need to enter a description here, but this is just for my own memory, so I know which variables I'm using for what. And then I have my weight change query, my nutritional status query, and my past history query. These are all set to external because they're going to be mapped back to a specific query within the doc section. So we're going to jump over to the rule tab. And we go and look at the documentation section. I'm going to look at the preview first so you can see what we're working with. You'll notice that some of the queries are group response, and one of the queries is a group response and the other two are group response multiple. So when you're dealing with a group response multiple, you're going to have the values existing in the multiple. So you need to make sure you calculate everything within the multiple as well as calculate it with its other queries that are involved in the rule. So we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to delete this all out so you can see me build it rather than just me showing you this is what the rule looks like. So this is an example of when I would use group response value. So format, source, variable. I'm going to start with my weight change, and I want to convert that to group response value. I'm going to save it back to itself, and I want to do group response value because I want to look to a specific field in the group response dictionary. So I want to show that. I want to look to this value field right here. So within the rule, by saying group response value, it knows to look back to the query, then look to the group response dictionary, and look to this field right here. Okay. So I'm going to build the next line. So string manipulation, format, source, and I want to do my nutritional status. I want to convert that to group response value, save as NS. Since my nutritional status query is also a group response multiple, this is one of the ones that I need to make sure that I calculate it into itself as well and make sure I calculate everything if I click multiple options. And I do that also by using string manipulation, format, source, variable, I'm going to look to NS, and then I need to do convert to series sum. And what series sum is doing is it's calculating the value within the nutritional status. And then I also need to do that for my patient history as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do the convert to series sum. So once I have those 5 lines, then I need to make sure it calculates. So before I do a calculation, I want to make sure that all the responses exist. So I do that by doing if variable weight change exists and my variable of nutritional status exists and my past history exists. Then I'm going to do a statement of expressions, compute expression, and here I'm going to do my variable of weight change operator plus variable nutritional status plus past history, and then I want to save that as V1. And then I can end line here, and then I can end if or I can do statement. I'm going to do end if and then do a separate statement. So, sorry, I pushed OK, didn't mean to do OK. And set program result to V1. So what that's going to do is it's going to make sure all of the queries exist, then it's going to add them together, it's going to save what it adds together as V1, and then set program result is what I want the query to display with. So over in the documentation section dictionary, I have my nutritional status score query. It's attached with a calculate rule. Here's my calculate rule. My nutritional status variable, so that is looking to my main tab, and that is looking to this NS variable. And I map that to my nutritional status query. I map my past history to patient history, and then my weight change to my weight change. So when I go over to my patient, and I click some options, I see my calculation. You'll notice as I click additional options within my group response multiples, the number does go up, and that's because of the series sum. if I didn't have the series sum there, it wouldn't know what to do with the calculation. Are there any questions?
We do have a question asking if we could define string manipulations. So just translate what this is saying within the rule.
So that's what string manipulation is doing. So with string manipulation of format, like Conchetta went over, that's to translate that to something else. We also have the extract option, which allows us to pull something out of the variable, join, concatenate things, it puts things together. Locate, it allows me to look for something specific. So if I'm looking for maybe a slash in a blood pressure, and then length allows me to determine the length of something. Are there any questions in the chat? All right. Next, I'm going to be looking at modulus. So we've been doing here at Meditech, we do a PCS classroom special topic seminar, usually about twice a year. And the last day of that seminar, we always go over rules. And during that time, I go over what Conchetta went over earlier today before I took over, and some more, some rules. And I get to the modulus portion, and I always ask if anyone has a clinical example on when we would ever use modulus. Because as Conchetta mentioned, the modulus is going to be the remainder on a division. And I would always get blank stares, and I really wanted to understand where this would be used in PCS. So maybe about a year ago, I was helping a customer with a rule, and they were looking to calculate billable hours. And they wanted to round up or round down based on it being over a certain amount. So I reached out to some of our programmers and some of our, counterparts in development, and I explained what we were trying to do, and I gave them what I had done already, and somebody came back with, oh, this is where you could use the modulus, and I was so excited because I wanted an example of it. So I wanted to make sure that I showed that today. So this is a little bit of a longer rule, so we're going to look through it. Some of it might look familiar because we're using some date time things that we've used in other places as well. So here on my variables tab, I'm going to have 4 external variables, which are going to be my start date, my start time, my end date, and my end time. And then you'll notice that I have a lot of other variables in here. And these are literally just placeholders for things. So I'm taking my external variables and I'm manipulating them to get a final result. So I need placeholders within that rule. So like I said, it's a little bit long, but I'm going to go through it so we can see what it's doing. So I'm going to remove all this. So the first thing I need to do is determine the direct elapsed time between my start date and my start time. So I only want to do that if my start date, my start time, my end date, and my end time exist. So I want to look to my start date exists and my start time exists. And sorry, my computer's getting a little funky when I'm doing this. Then, so from there, I'm going to be, so I want to make sure that those all exist. If those all exist, let's go and do some things. So I'm going to do statement, expressions, and the first thing I want to do is create list. So we don't have a query that can be used to do start date and start time. So the first thing I need to do is put my start date and my start time together. So I'm going to do that using create list. So create list, I'm going to do start date, and then I'm going to click variable again. and do my start time. And then I want to save that as, we're going to use V1. And then end line, and it puts it in there down for me. But the next thing I want to do is I want to convert that. So now I've put my start date and time together, but the system is just seeing those as two separate queries. So I want to make sure that the system knows that that is a date time variable. So I need to use string manipulation to do that. So I'm going to do string manipulation, format, source. I'm going to do variable. I'm going to do V1 because that's what I did over here. And I want to convert that to date time create. And I'm going to save that as my start date time variable. And what that did is it took my V1 and made sure that the system was knows that this is a start date time. That it's not two separate queries now and two separate values. It knows that it's one that value. Now I need to do that with my end date time. I'm going to save that one as V2, end line, and then I need to do string manipulation to do date time create for that one as well. And I'm going to save that to my end date time. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to put my start date time and my end date time together because there's a cool function within the rule dictionary that allows me to take those two and do elapsed time between them. So from here, I need to do create list again. And I'm going to do my start date time and my end date time. I'm going to save that as E3, end line. And then I want to string manipulation. Convert to, and I'm going to do my date time elapsed. And that just takes the start date time and the end date time and determines the elapsed time between them. And this I'm going to end. So what we did in this one line is I made my start date and time its own thing, my end date and time its own, and then I took both of those, put them together, and figured out the amount of time that elapsed between them. So then the next thing I want to do is figure out some minutes to do the next portion. So if my elapsed date time over here exists, then I'm going to compute P4, and I'm going to divide it, divide here, by 60, and save that to my min. And that's its own as well. So now what we're going to be doing is taking my end time, and I'm going to grab the first two characters so I know what my hours are. So I'm going to build the next couple portions of the line, and then I'll explain in detail what we're doing there. So I'm going to do string manipulation, and I am going to extract from variable ET. I'm going to do from the left number of characters, 2. I'm going to save that as H. So that is from my end time, that's the first two characters, so the hours from the end time. And then I want to do the same thing for the minutes. So I'm going to extract from the variable of ET, start that, and I'm actually going to do the right here. Number of characters, I'm going to do 2. save that as M, and that is the minutes from the end time. Then the first thing that I'm going to do is take the hours from here and times that by 60, so I know what those hours are in minutes. So I have this HM variable that I'm using. So all these variables are just placeholders. So next I want to take that HM, so my hours in minutes, and I'm going to add that to my minutes. So I know exactly what my end date time is actually in minutes. Save that as end. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I want to see what really the difference is between the minutes here and the end over here. And this is where I'm going to start using the modulus. So the first thing I need to do is compute and I'm going to minus that from the end and then save that as F. And now is where I'm going to start doing, start with my division and then go to my modulus. So first, expressions, compute, variable, so I'm going to take the F, and I'm going to divide that by 60 to get my result. And then I'm also going to take F and do the modulus of 60. I'm actually going to save that as result 2. So what I did in those two lines is I took my value from F, divided by 60 to get my result, and then I took F, and then what the system did with the modulus is divided by 60, but since I'm doing modulus, it's just getting me my remainder. So if I do, so now I want to see if my result 2 is greater than or equal to number 31. So what this is doing is if the minutes is greater than 31, then what I want it to do, so my result 2, so if my modulus is greater than 32, then I want to compute expression my result and add 1 because it's more than 31 minutes, so I want it to add the full hour. 1, save as variable, result 3, end line, and then I'm going to do set program result to result 3, and then I'm going to do else, because if result 2 is not greater than or equal to 31, I don't want it to add the 1, so I just want it to set program result to result and end if. So really, I was just trying to calculate billable hours. So if we go and look at the documentation section, you'll see I have my start date, my start time, end date, end time, billable hours here, and it's attached as a calculate rule. So we'll jump over the patient, and we'll put my start date as T minus, we'll do, what's today? All right, do 11/9/2017. And then I'll do this as 16/18 and do this as 11, 11, 17 with 1504. So my billable hours comes out to 32. And what it did was, so the actual elapsed time between that start date and that start date time and that end date time comes out to 31 hours and 42 minutes. But I want it to display 32 because that 42 is greater than 31. So then my billable hours becomes 32.
We do have a question that's related to the rule that Deb was just building. So we have, for Foley catheter elapsed time, we're trying to make a rule to work similar to this, but you have the now, so current date, current time, minus SDST. And we got asked, is it possible to make a simple tweak to this rule that we're building now to achieve that? You have a rule now that's supposed to do now minus SDST, but it isn't working.
Okay. We would probably need to look at that rule separately. So if you want to open up a task with your PCS specialist, giving us the rule mnemonic and all of the information with that rule, that's something that your PCS specialist can look at for you. All right. All right, so the next one, I didn't set up in the rule dictionary. So you'll see there's no rules here. I actually set it up in the query dictionary. So we have 3 different queries that are pulling in our last lab. So the first one I have, so over on the mapping tab, I have a seed set up. And what I'm doing here is I am pulling the last lab result for my white blood count. So if I go into my patient, the first one here is that one that I'm seeding in directly. And then the next 2 I built using some rules. And what I did, so for the first one, I wanted to get rid of, for the first one, I have it coming straight. But for the second one, I wanted to get rid of those outside brackets. So it just gives me the value. And then this last one down here is I just wanted the value without the, the range information. So this is the first one here. All I need to do is do the method of data field, and then I need to pull in the specific data field that I want to use, so my EMR last lab. In the keyword field, I need to select constant, and then I need to type in that specific lab item on what it's called, so I needed to type in white blood count here. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the next example. Are there any questions?
We did get asked if on our Meditech website there's a modulus rule.
On the Meditech website, no, but there is a knowledge base article that shows that exact rule that I just went over. So there's not one on the Meditech website, but there is one in the knowledge base. And I can try and get that number for you. Okay. So we're going to pull up the next example with white blood count. So here on the mapping tab, I did seed again, and then I actually did the method of rule here because I wanted to get rid of those brackets. So we're going to go into the rule dictionary and take a look at that rule. So I needed to make sure I had a category of clinical data. because over on the variables tab, I am using the EMR last lab. And at the key field, I need to make sure I enter in a white blood count. And then over on the rule tab, this one's a little bit simpler. And these 3 examples do exist on our PCS product and resource homepage as well. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all this and show you how this one's built. So enter line, expressions, compute. I want to look at my field. And this is another example of where I'm going to use offset. And by using offset here, it gets rid of those brackets for me. And then I just need to set program result to white blood count and line. And building that and attaching it here to the query allows me to get this result here. Okay. Take a look at the next one. So once again, over on the mapping tab, I set up a seed with a method of rule. We're going to pull up this rule. And this one is a little bit longer than the one we just looked at. Once again, I do need to define the category of clinical data. And then over on my variables tab, I do need some variables. And then I have the EMR last lab with my white blood count. So I'm going to remove all this and so we can walk through it. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that my field exists with my value. And if it does, then I'm going to do string manipulation and source and field. And I convert that to series maximum just so it knows everything that's in there. Series maximum. And I want to save that as V1 and line. And then end if. And the next thing I'm doing here is just finding some blank spaces so I can make sure I just get that number. So here I'm going to do string manipulation. I'm going to locate source from variable of V1. I want to locate free text, and I'm just going to do space enter here. So it's looking for where the first space is. And I want to save that as V2. And then I want to string manipulation again, and I'm going to do extract from variable V1, start, I'm going to do the left, and number of characters, variable V2. So what it's doing is it's finding how many characters it took to get to that space. So what it's essentially doing, we go over here. So it's looking here, and it's looking to where we get to this space. And once it gets to that space, it wants to take that and save that as V3, so I only have what is before the space. And then I want to set program result to V3 and line. And that is how we're getting these different white blood cell counts here. Is there any questions? I did notice a question. You can't find presentation, or did you already answer that one? Yep. Oh, okay, sorry. All right. So the next one, the last rule example we have today is more advanced elapsed time. So it uses some of the similar items that we went over with the modulus, but does a little bit more. I'll close my query dictionary. Okay. So you'll notice over on the main tab, I did set the category of reg, and that is because I need to use MIS current date and current time. I have a fair amount of variables here because I do need a lot of placeholders. I only have 4 that are set to external, and those are my start date, my start time, my end date, and my end time. So this is a bit longer, and what this rule is doing is this is calculating the start date and the elapsed time of something based on either the start date and time and end date and time existing, or using it to calculate it if I am working off of the MIS current time. So if it hasn't ended yet, I want to know what my elapsed time is. So we're going to delete all this out, and I'm going to walk through building it. Is there a question?
Yes, we got asked that you still aren't able to find the presentation. We're not going to have this exact presentation on our product and resource page.
Yep, so the presentation that Conchetta went over this morning, there is one that is similar to that. Since what I'm going over right now is the live demo, we don't have a presentation that goes along with it since it is a live demonstration. It's not in a presentation format. I am recording it, and hopefully we will be able to share that recording with you if you reach out to your specialist. I would say probably reach out to them maybe tomorrow or later in the week, just because after the presentation is done, it does need to convert, which takes a little bit of time. So if you are looking for that, we should be able to provide you with that. But the portion that I am going over today, we do not have a specific presentation for that because this is a live demonstration.
So the presentation that I did, that will be, so it's not the exact one, but it's basically the same. It's on our PCS product and resource page. If you scroll down kind of towards like the middle of the screen, we have a box. It's just called the rule presentations, and the dictionary, that's going to be the presentation that's most similar to what I presented earlier this afternoon. And we also got asked, could you please not delete the code, but rather explain?
Okay, yeah, I can do that instead. Usually that's what I used to do, but I had gotten some people asking that it would make more sense if I went through and built it. So that's why I kind of had switched over to that method, but I can certainly do it this way as well. This one might make a little bit more sense because this is a longer one. My throat's getting a little dry, so I need to take a sip of my water. It's that time of the year. Okay, so are there any other questions before I go over this one? Okay, all right. So the first line here, what this one is doing is I'm taking the MIS current date and time and converting that to date internal. And that's just making sure that the system converts the current date and time to a way that the rule can review it. Okay. Line 2, the first thing I'm doing here is similar to what we did in the modulus rule. So I'm making sure my start date query, my start time query, my end date query, and my end time query all exist. And then if those exist, I want to put my start date and time together and make it its own variable, and then I use the date time create to make it so that the system knows that this is a date time value. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my end date and my end time. And then I want to put those together to use that fancy elapsed functionality. And then I want to set program and save that V4. Alternatively, so if just my start date and my start time exists, I want it to do the next part. So if my end date and time does not exist, it's not going to do this first part here. It's going to look to this next part to only do this part here. So I put together my start date and time like I did previously and do that date time create. Then down here, what I'm doing is I have V6, and V6 references up here. So I'm taking the current date and I'm putting that together with the current time. So instead of doing that with an end time query, it's doing that with the current time. So I'm doing the date time create and then creating that list as well. Down here, I want to get the minutes because what I'm actually doing in this rule is I want it to display in a format of days, hours, minutes. So I'm taking my V4, dividing it by 60 to get the minutes. If it's less than 60, I just want minutes here. And then, but if it's greater than 60, I want to take my minutes and divide it by 60 so I get what my hours are. And then if I do have hours here, it's going to take that to do H2, which I'm going to use a little bit further down. And then what I want to do is take my minutes from up here and minus that from the H2 to get my minutes. So it knows exactly how many minutes and hours I'm going to need down here. Down here, if my hours are greater than 24, then it becomes days. So I am going to divide that by 24 to get the amount of days that I have. If my days exist, I want to make sure that I have my days and minus the extra hours. So I can, if it's 1 day and 2 hours, so that's going to be 26 hours over here. So I want to make sure I have that become 1 day and 2 hours. So then down here in line 9, what I'm doing is making sure the minutes, if any of them exist, minutes, hours, days exist, then I use concatenate to put the variable of days next to my D variable, my hours, minutes, and then saving that as V9, and then I set my program result to V9. I then have this attached in the doc section dictionary, elapsed time, and I have this elapsed time here, and I map my end date variable to my end date, my end time to end time, start date, start time, start date, start date, start time, start time. So we'll do T minus 12 and 12:03. So it's letting me know that worked out pretty well. So it's been 12 days, 3 hours, and 36 minutes since that time. But then but what if I have an end date time? So say my end date time was T minus 3, now, and then it adjusts my elapsed time to be 9 days, 3 hours, and 36 minutes. Okay. Are there any questions on that rule? Okay. Oh.
We just got a positive feedback. This rule is very helpful.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear it. I don't know if I put this one up in a knowledge base yet. I don't know if I have, but I will be sure to do that. But it will be in the presentation, so you can see it and possibly build it if you need to. And hopefully I will be able to get a knowledge base article on that.
We also got all the rules have been very helpful. We also got asked, can you make an elapsed time without having an end date and time?
Yes, so that's what, if I didn't do this first part here, and I do this second part, that's what I'm doing because I don't have the end date time. There's an example of that on our project and resource homepage. There's an example of each of them on the project and resource homepage, and I kind of took those and mashed them together to get this. If you have an end date time, you can do it. If you don't have an end date time, you can also do it, and it looks to the current. Okay, so I wanted to show you some things like some of the rules I referenced that are on the project and resource homepage. Show you a cool thing that I don't know if everyone knows about the rule dictionary yet, and then maybe take a look at knowledge base articles that you guys can look in there and see. And then within hopefully the very near future, we're currently, Meditech as a whole is working on a rules database. And this rules database will allow you to go in, look at rules that are on there, even submit your own rules, because we do have this import-export feature, which allows, so if I PCS elapse, so that one that I just looked at, no, export is what I wanted to cancel. We're going to click back for a minute because my computer's freaking out on me.
We got just a quick question. Can you use reg date and time for elapsed time?
I don't believe we'll be able to use the reg date and time because we're usually looking for, I'm going to cancel the rule dictionaries right now. Because we usually need to start with something at the start date time. Because in order to do a calculation, you need something entered in. So you'd at least need some type of date time for it to trigger. So what I was trying to show in the import-export is, so that specific rule, so say I built this, you build a rule in test. I hope everyone knows about this routine. If you're not CMS and you do have to, you don't have the luxury of propagation, you do have to build things in test before live. You actually move it. So I built it in test and now I want to put it into live. So I have this import-export down here, and I can export it to my desktop, and I click export here, and then over on my desktop, I have, what's today, 15th, where'd you go? Oh, I must have did it already, that's why. So it's down here, and this allows me to then go in and select import, and I can look up from my desktop and pull that one in. It already exists, so it just this one's going to override it, but it allows me to move something from test into live.
We got another question. So is the reg date and time not one of the standard fields if you use category of reg?
I would have to look, and the other thing to keep in mind is just because the field is there doesn't mean we can actually use it. I know we can use we do have the reg time. I don't think we have the registration date, so it might not be, we have the service date time in here, but the thing to keep in mind is just because the field is here doesn't mean we can use it. Unfortunately, we are not able to use all of the fields that are in here. Anything else?
We got you guys seem to like the tip for the export and import.
Oh, great. Yeah, I always I want to always, point that out, make sure people know about it because it makes your life a whole lot easier. And then the next one I wanted, is there a question? Okay.
So we got asked if we could go back to the modulus rule and explain line 7.
Sure. So line 7 is taking my minutes from up here and subtracting it from the end right here. And so line 6 is taking the hours and minutes from my end time, and it puts those together so I know what my hours here in minutes. So say my end time was, what did I use? I used 15:04. So what I had to do was I had to take my 15 and times that by 60, which gives me what does that give me? About 900, yeah. So that gives me 900, and that gives me HM, and then I take my minutes, which I used 04, and that gives me 900.04, and then I have, that is my end over here, and then the minutes, I need to subtract the 1904 from the total elapsed time to determine, because I was looking for billable hours. So I could only bill, so because for this specific example that we were using, you could only bill for a certain amount of time.
We also were asked what the difference between move and import and export was, and that we have someone saying they've been using the move to copy rules from Test Alive and asking if this was wrong to do.
No, you can still do that. The move you can only use if you're not mid-update. So move allows it to, it pushes it for you. And, as it says in here, it doesn't copy anything else. It just copies the rules. But you can only use move if you are the same release in Test and Live. So that's why I tend to highlight import because we do have a lot of sites that are mid-update. So the next one I wanted to go over is search. This is very, very new. So anytime I would do a rules presentation, I would always say, make sure you use your notes section to put what documentation section you have this rule on, because there's no report for this. And after saying this for a very long time, it was finally realized that we needed something for this. So we have it now. So if I pull in, we'll look at that PCS elapse that I just did. If I do include inactive doc sections, I can do yes or no, and then I search. And what this does is it shows me the rule, the type, the doc section it's on, if it's active or not, the questions that it's on, and the question that it's attached to. So I can run this for multiples, and search, and it's going to give me all those. These only work for rules that are on documentation sections, but it is a very helpful tool. All right. Okay, next thing I wanted to do was highlight our product and resource homepage.
We have a question. We got asked, would the search work with partial names, or does it have to be the full name?
Well, so if I can actually do a lookup here, so I can't just type in, so if I just typed in PCS here, it's going to do a lookup and I have to select something. So I'm going to go to customers. Product resources, I'm going to go to 6X. Patient care systems. And then over here on under training materials, we have rules. So we have different types of rule examples. So I have my calculate rules. So I have down here, I have my elapsed date, time, and hours using MIS current date and time. So if you don't have an end date and time, that's the one that you can use. You can use elapsed time to display both hours and minutes. And then there's also another one. Oh, and then the elapsed time using a documented date to the MIS current date. And like I said, for each different type of rule, there are multiple examples. And then the rule presentation. So as Conchetta mentioned, this presentation here is almost the exact same presentation, just in a font may be different for the most part, but all of the content is the same. And it's in PDF form, and it goes through all of that information that we went over. And then down here, we have some helpful rule documentation. We have the import-export routine. So if you need more information on using that, there is a page on that. There. And it just outlines how you can do that. And then also there are some links to knowledge base if you want to look at a specific knowledge base article. And then I'm going to go back and get to the knowledge base. So we have our knowledge base routine under learning. And I can search knowledge base here, and I can search by application. So if you search by, say, PCS, oops, I didn't want to select all of them. And platform, I can do 6X, and I can try rule, search. It's going to give me a list of any knowledge bases that have rule listed. So we have using modulus on PCS rule assessment. So that exact rule that I went over is 55420. We have that as well in there. And there's multiple other ones in here that I would definitely recommend taking a look at that you might be able to find helpful. Do we have any other questions?
So we were asked, we have someone who's looking to build a rule that does what our PCS elapsed rule does. She's asking if there's a way that you can import the rule into their dictionary.
So if I don't think I'll be able to import my rule into your dictionary. Like I mentioned, I am going to try and get a knowledge base article written about that rule so you can take a look at it there. Once we have the rules database, hopefully that's one that we can put in there. But I would recommend you can use this presentation once it's able to be in there. We can do that, or take a look at the presentation and build it from there. Are there any other questions? All right. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. So I did record the session, and I will be, I need to convert it and then, make sure that it converts just fine. And then if you are interested in getting the recording, please be sure to reach out to your specialist about getting that out to you.
We got asked one more thing, if there's anywhere that users can look, or are there any resources for basically like the breakdown of the rules, so defining what expressions are, the dialog box, string manipulation, the proceeding steps of the rule, extract, and things like that.
So that presentation that I just showed, that's on our PCS project and resource homepage. There's, I believe, 4 presentations there that go through that information. We also do offer a PCS special topic seminar, and during that time we do go over rules in a more basic manner rather than something more advanced like this. All right, well, is that it? Okay. I hope that everyone enjoyed today's session. I thank everyone very much. And tomorrow we will be coming back with Dave Rudy to go over OM rules and some of their concepts. Hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.